Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. You know who does not have support right now? It's that guy right there, Billy Napier. Okay, so obviously, look, on whatever day it was, what was it? Sunday morning. We obviously talked a lot about the Florida game against USF over the course of the weekend. USF gets the 18-16 win. I'll say this. I listen to other people's breakdowns. I'm not trying to brag. I think we did as good of a job as anybody. Some people don't want to criticize Billy Napier. They want to stay in his good graces. They wanted this, they wanted that. Or, I hate to say it, they just don't know enough about football to break it down. But Billy Napier literally did everything that you could wrong as a head coach late in that game to cost his team. There's no other way to describe it. There's no other way to put it. From the getting the ball back with 2:49 left and running two pass plays, what do we have about, I don't know, what was it, 29 seconds or something run off the clock? USF doesn't have to call a timeout. To the fact that he has players spitting on the opponents. I'm sorry, in a post-Jalen Carter world, you can't be doing that. Oh, by the way, on top of it, the lack of him using his timeouts, not letting USF score, it was a total train wreck, okay? And so, listen, we talked about it on Sunday, and I stand by everything I said. And I don't think it's like some big, crazy, controversial take. Billy Napier's done. I mean, he's not getting fired today. He's not getting fired tomorrow, but he's not going to win the games that he needs to win to have the success that he is going to need to retain his job, right? I mean, you go through the schedule, 8 more games against ranked opponents starting this weekend against LSU, then at Miami, then Texas, then at Texas A&M, and that doesn't even include Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss, on and on. It's just, it's basically over because he's not going to get the wins. It's really bad. And I feel bad. I'm glad that they gave him another year, but it ain't going to happen. And if you needed proof it ain't going to happen. I saw a very interesting report this week that kind of reflects that basically, like, any goodwill that Billy Napier had, not only with the fan base, but even in the administration, is basically over. Okay. And so to give you a little bit of context before I get to the report that popped up on Monday, got to go back to this time last year. So Florida obviously loses its opener in week 1 at Miami. To Miami. They get destroyed in the Swamp. It was in Gainesville. I think I just said at Miami. It was in Gainesville. Okay. But they lose that game, come back, they play a nobody and win. Then they get smoked at home by Texas A&M in week 3. And you can kind of just tell right away. It's like, oh, this is not going well. But at the time, Billy Napier had a little bit of a trump card, right? The trump card was that the AD, Scott Strickland, was kind of tied to him. Scott Strickland, for people who don't know, he's been there since 2016. He was the guy that hired Dan Mullen, had to fire Dan Mullen, and then hired Billy Napier. And so the thought a year ago at this time was essentially that, like, look, I'm sorry. Bottom line is that we are not letting Scott Strickland make a third football coaching hire. There's an old adage that, you know, you get to mess up once, but if you screw up that second time, the AD is out. Like, you're not going to get a third chance to make a coaching hire, okay? But so that was the context last year, was that Billy Napier was kind of tied to the AD Scott Strickland, and that if Billy Napier had to be fired, then Scott Strickland was probably going with him. And so there was kind of this thing. He had the administration support because the administration had no choice but to support him. What becomes interesting is a little news story that popped last week that otherwise would be meaningless except for what happened on Saturday afternoon against USF. Okay. So you go back to the USF game. You go back to the fact that in that game you lose, and in that game you're coming off this loss. But the story here, and you go back to last week, is the fact that prior to that game, Florida announced that Scott Strickland, the AD, had actually gotten an extension. Basically, Florida was sitting there saying, wait a second now, Billy Napier figured it out. The basketball coach you hired just won a national championship. Scott Strickland got an extension. And so I bring it up because I saw a very interesting report. Our buddy John Talty, he's doing good work over at CBS Sports. Last week, we talked a little bit about him with the Alabama Kalen DeBoer report. Well, he had another very interesting report this week, basically reflecting that a year ago, Scott Strickland kind of needed Billy Napier to succeed because Scott Strickland's job was kind of on the line with Billy Napier. It really ain't that way anymore. We got a couple quotes from the article. Producer Matt, you can pop them up. So this is from CBS Sports' John Talty. Strickland, this is last year, repeatedly defended Napier a year ago in part because there was a belief their futures were tied together. Strickland told people privately he had the power to keep or fire Napier, but after already firing two previous hires in Jim McElwain and Dan Mullen, by the way, I looked it up. He didn't actually hire Jim McElwain, but he did fire Jim McElwain. There were industry questions on how it would play out in reality. In other words, would they actually, again, let him hire a third head coach? Ultimately, Florida made the call to keep Napier, and it paid off with a strong finish with wins over LSU and Ole Miss that made the Gators a trendy playoff pick this preseason. It continues. One source told CBS earlier this week, Strickland now does not have to be as loyal to Napier. He hired a men's basketball coach in Todd Golden that won a national championship, an important bullet point on his resume. A year ago, Strickland was nervous about the situation. Now he has the confidence to do what is needed. The money was there a year ago to fire Napier, according to sources, and will be there again if needed. It wraps with a quote from an anonymous source. Scott, the AD, was hoping it'd work out for his own sake a little bit, said the source. Scott wanted to preach patience last year. Now that he's got a new 5-year deal and some security, if Billy goes 6-6, is he going to do it? Well, first of all, I'll tell you this. If Billy Napier goes 6-6, he's going to do it. But listen, I think this article, and I think that particular quote, it really does a good job of contextualizing what the situation is at Florida. A year ago, the AD was tied to Billy Napier, and now the AD isn't, okay? And so, like I said, let me even backtrack. One of our interns, Aaron Torres Media, was texting me the other day about his specific school. We have all the Torres on this, Torres on that, Torres on the Hogs, Torres on the Vols, whatever. And he was texting me. He's like, man, the more I learn about college sports, the more I kind of realize how political it is. That's exactly what it is. It's very political. Everybody's fighting. Everybody's trying to save themselves. Everybody's creating alliances. And again, a year ago, there was a very strong Scott Strickland, Billy Napier alliance that just doesn't exist anymore. Now, I don't know what their personal relationship is, but ultimately it doesn't matter what their personal relationship is because Scott Strickland now has the upper hand professionally. As John Talty said, basically a year ago, Scott Strickland might claim that he had the power to fire Billy Napier, but did he really? I don't know, and it ultimately didn't come down to that. But now Scott Strickland knows that he can make that move without having to worry about his future. He signed a 5-year contract. He's going to get paid out. He ain't going anywhere. And so now it makes Billy Napier's tenure much more, fluid. What I would say, two quick thoughts on the actual report itself. One, this probably isn't a surprise, but I do find it interesting that it is acknowledged Florida has the money to fire Billy Napier. And I think in this NIL, in this, rev share world where basically every dollar counts, every penny is pinched, I do think it's the reality that a lot of these coaches with huge buyouts, it's not just as simple as writing a check, right? Even I know that Jimbo Fisher was a once in a lifetime outlier, but it's like you get into these 30, 40, $50 million buyouts, these schools can't do it. It doesn't matter how it's structured. This is why, by the way, Mark Stoops ain't going anywhere at Kentucky if he doesn't want to. It's why Kalen DeBoer, that buyout's a little bit different because he isn't owed as much up front. But, even like, I'll give you an example. We talked about Mark Stoops, Brent Venables. I remember, Brent Venables, if he doesn't do this, he's not going to be back. And it's like, yeah, like if Brent Venables wins 4 games, he's definitely not going to be back. But they would have owed Brent Venables like $35 million to fire him after this year. Now, I don't think he's going to have a bad year, but it's just like the idea that we're just going to fire dudes after 1 or 2 bad years, it's just not the reality anymore. But at Florida, it's a little bit different. Napier's buyout is now under $20 million. By the way, they had the buyout last year, according to John Talty, but the buyout now is under $20 million. I think about half of it would be owed up front, and the rest is paid out. So all of a sudden, $10 million to get rid of Billy Napier ain't that much, and it's definitely not that much when you no longer have allegiance in the building that you once did. And so this is bad news for Billy Napier. I think it's a bad situation, and I don't think it's getting any better. I mean, to me, again, and we talked about this on Sunday's show, part of the situation with Billy Napier, part of the situation with what's going on with him, it's not just that you lost to South Florida. It's that you needed to beat South Florida because of everything else on the schedule. Listen, you don't have to be a college football insider, somebody who covers this stuff 365 to just look at the schedule and to realize how daunting it is, right? I think these next 4 games, even before the USF loss, we're going to define the season. I think coming into the year, you kind of just felt like, okay, at LSU, at Miami, Texas at home, at A&M. If you can go 2-2 in that stretch, that probably now looks like a 9-3, 8-4 type season, and now maybe you could keep your job. That is not factoring in the fact that the assumption is you're going to go 2-0 against Long Island and USF, okay? And so I just bring it up because now that you lost to USF, forget how you've actually looked. Just look at the schedule. The next 4, I just said, at LSU, at Miami, Texas, at Texas A&M. Then you get a break by only playing Mississippi State, who, oh, by the way, should be in the top 25 this week. I don't understand how they're not. Then you play Georgia and Jacksonville. Then you get Tennessee at home, Ole Miss on the road. And all of a sudden, let's not forget, that Florida State game does not look like a pushover like it once was. So now, all of a sudden, just forget finding me the 9 wins, the 8 wins that you would have confidently kept your job. Can you find 6 wins? It's hard for me to even find 6 wins on that schedule. There's Kentucky, Mississippi State, maybe. Then after that, kind of hard to find them, right? It's kind of hard to find them. Florida State is better than we thought. I think Tennessee, which we'll talk about in a minute, is better than we thought, even though they've historically struggled in Gainesville. So I just go on and on down the list and say, like, this guy's done, man. This guy is done. Listen, we got all of probably November and December to start talking about coaching candidates. But, dude, he had a window. He was the first guy I've ever seen that saved his job and flipped his fan base and gave his fan base confidence that he was the guy. And then, boom, it immediately disappeared on Saturday with that loss to USF. Just a bad look.